269 pounds of fentanyl pills and powder seized in this case could have yielded a staggering 6.9 million lethal doses.
At 6:12 a.m., Seattle heard a sound it couldn't place. Not sirens, not traffic, not rain. It was the absence of routine. Ferries idled longer than usual. Elevators paused between floors. Phones showed signal, but messages queued before sending. Somewhere between the waterfront fog and the first light over the Cascades, the city felt a pressure change. Then a line moved through secure channels. Brief, clinical, irreversible. Execute Pacific frame. Hold flow. No alerts followed. No public staging. What arrived instead was alignment. Streets that never closed began to prioritize. Buildings opened early. Schedules bent. A city built on movement sensed that movement had been edited overnight. By the time commuters stepped outside, Seattle was still Seattle, but it was running on a different clock. The operation unfolded as choreography, not a sweep. ICE field units moved first, placing presence where flow mattered and ignoring what didn't. The objective wasn't spectacle, it was leverage. Let the city keep breathing while its arteries were gently redirected. FBI task elements followed in parallel lanes, mapping finances and communications in real time, never crossing paths, never needing to. For months, analysts had watched a pattern that refused to spike. Cartel leadership embedded behind logistics firms, import-export shells, and short-term leases that rotated before curiosity could form. The fentanyl didn't arrive in waves, it arrived as maintenance. Weapons existed as contingencies, not statements. Glock 19, ES secured. AR-15 platforms slung and untouched. Confidence lived in timing. At the signal, timing collapsed. A warehouse near the Duwamish Waterway lost access control for 9 seconds, long enough. Forklifts stopped mid-turn. Doors opened to clean aisles and warmer than expected servers. Field tests confirmed what labels denied. Pallets were tagged, not rushed. The work was administrative because the design had been administrative. Across the city, a residential tower with a view of Elliott Bay received calm knocks delivered by people who already had the answers. Devices were bagged, credentials checked. Leaders were separated quietly and moved into waiting transport units whose routes had been cleared hours earlier. No raised voices, no cameras invited. Attempts to adapt surfaced and vanished. Backup phones lit up and went dark. Couriers tried familiar shortcuts that now fed into staffed corridors. Redundancy, once protection, became a map. The FBI froze accounts mid-transfer, not to punish, but to still the system and let it confess. Money that had flowed with title predictability sat immobile, exposing the structure beneath it. By mid-morning, the scale clarified. Cartel leadership detained across synchronized sites. Fentanyl staged for distribution logged and sealed. Weapons cataloged where they rested. The city stayed calm because calm had been engineered into the plan. Seattle didn't witness a raid. It witnessed a reconfiguration, one assembled from timing, paperwork, and the quiet realization that when flow is captured, power doesn't shout, it complies. Phase 2 began the moment leadership was removed from the map. What followed wasn't chaos, it was vacuum. Decisions that once arrived on time didn't arrive at all. Phones rang without answers. Dashboards refreshed and showed nothing new. The city felt it as a pause, like a breath held too long. ICE units exploited the pause immediately. Transit-adjacent corridors became checkpoints without looking like them. Streets stayed open, but choices narrowed. Service elevators stalled for inspection. Loading docks accepted trucks and then didn't release them. The movement that had kept the cartel invisible now fed directly into control. In Sodo, a logistics hub tried to restart a stalled handoff. Forklifts moved, paperwork printed. The effort was sincere and futile. Units arrived from two directions, calm and precise. Seals broke, pallets were logged. The hub returned to stillness before anyone could raise their voice. Across town, a cluster of short-term rentals emptied in sequence. Doors opened, devices were collected. Individuals were escorted to transport already routed and waiting. No explanations beyond procedure, no arguments beyond compliance. The work moved faster than rumor. The FBI tightened the financial frame. Accounts froze mid-cycle. Shell entities attempted reroutes and triggered additional flags. The redundancy that once insulated operations now amplified exposure. Every workaround another breadcrumb. The money didn't disappear. It stopped, revealing where it had been going all along. Weapons appeared only as contingencies. Glock 17, XUSE secured in drawers, a single AR-15 platform stored behind maintenance panels. Never raised, never needed. This wasn't a confrontation, it was a recalibration. By afternoon, Seattle's undercurrent had lost coherence. Couriers waited for instructions that didn't come. Managers stared at screens that no longer moved. Routes that had forgiven delays now punished them. The city above kept flowing, ferries docking, traffic humming, unaware that beneath the routine, an entire layer had gone silent. The corridors weren't blocked, they were disconnected. And disconnection, once complete, doesn't announce itself. Phase 3 was the moment the system realized it was being watched, and failed to hide it. With leadership detained and corridors disconnected, the cartel's remaining operators attempted to restore rhythm. Messages went out in shorter bursts, instructions simplified. The network didn't panic, it compressed, trying to survive by becoming smaller and faster. ICE teams moved with that compression. In Ballard, a light industrial strip came alive before it should have. Vans arrived early. Doors opened. A transfer began that had been rehearsed 100 times. This time, it ended before it could begin. Units stepped in from opposite ends of the block, calm, unhurried. The vans shut down. The cargo stayed put. South of the city, a marina-adjacent warehouse attempted a quiet pivot, shifting material from land routes to water. The timing was off by minutes. Aerial units confirmed movement, fed it to the ground, and the pivot collapsed into documentation. Pallets logged, containers sealed, routes erased. The FBI tracked the communications layer as it frayed. Backup phones activated and burned out within hours. Encrypted channels rerouted through intermediaries who had already been identified. Every attempt to speak made the map clearer. Silence would have helped. They chose motion instead. Weapons surfaced again as background noise. Glock 19S locked away, a carbine secured in a locker. Signals of contingency meant for confrontation that never arrived. The pressure wasn't physical. It was informational. By late afternoon, the network's breathing turned shallow. Operators waited for confirmation that never came. Couriers circled familiar blocks and returned to empty docks. Managers tried to consolidate and found consolidation itself flagged. The redundancy that once kept the operation resilient now accelerated its exposure. Seattle moved on the surface as if nothing had changed. Below that routine, the cartel's network lost the ability to coordinate. It still existed, but without timing, without authority, without a future. And a system without a future doesn't last long. Phase 4 turned fragmentation into collapse. By early evening, Seattle's hidden layer had nowhere left to spread. ICE units shifted from disruption to closure, positioning themselves not where the network was, but where it had to go next. Streets remained open. Traffic flowed. Choice, however, disappeared. In the Central District, a mixed-use block attempted to consolidate operations under the cover of normal business hours. Deliveries overlapped. Staff rotated early. The adjustment was subtle and instantly visible. Units arrived without urgency, taking positions that closed exits without blocking them. The building emptied itself in minutes. Downtown, a financial services office tried to resume routine after a stalled afternoon. Transfers queued again. Compliance checks cleared. The relief lasted less than a minute. FBI systems flagged the restart as confirmation, not recovery. Agents entered, secured devices, and shut the loop permanently. Pressure arrived from above and below. Aerial assets tracked movement that no longer resolved into escape. Ground teams received geometry instead of orders, where paths narrowed, where patience would win. When a vehicle attempted to blend back into traffic, timing beat camouflage. The stop was clean, the result final. Weapons appeared only as artifacts of planning. Glock 17 SS secured, an AR-15 platform stored behind utility access. Never raised, never necessary. This phase belonged to inevitability, not confrontation. As night fell, the network stopped trying to move. Phones went dark by choice, not failure. Doors stayed closed. Assets sat idle. The system had learned that every action now produced consequence. Stillness became the safest option, and the most damaging. Seattle didn't feel seized. It felt compressed, a city still moving freely while the space beneath it vanished. And once that space was gone, the outcome could no longer be delayed. Phase 5 was not loud. It was decisive. By late night, the cartel's Seattle layer had one option left: influence without movement. Calls were placed through intermediaries. Messages were softened. Context was offered in the hope of time. The strategy assumed there was still someone listening. There wasn't. FBI coordination cells had already mapped the final communication spine, not by content, but by response latency. Who called after which disruption? How long it took for approvals to echo outward? When the last attempts arrived, they landed exactly where analysts expected. Each message confirmed the same thing. The network could still speak, but it could no longer act. ICE transport units rotated in with precision, not mass removals, targeted extractions. Individuals whose roles bridged leadership and logistics were separated quietly and moved into secure processing. Offices closed early with neutral explanations. Night crews were sent home. The city barely noticed the personnel changes. The system felt them immediately. Inside secure rooms, timelines were overlaid one final time. Seizures aligned with detentions. Financial freezes matched corridor closures. Decisions cascaded in the same order every time. The exposure no longer needed testimony. It relied on repetition, a pattern too consistent to argue with. Attempts to delay failed on contact. Emergency filings stalled. Compliance reviews arrived after the window had closed. The authority that once smoothed obstacles now faced a frame that answered only to sequence. The cartel's remaining leverage, its ability to ask for time, was gone. Weapons remained incidental. Glock 19 S secured, an AR-15 platform slung and untouched. This phase wasn't about confrontation. It was about silence replacing instruction. By midnight, the network stopped communicating altogether. Seattle didn't hear an ending. It felt it as quiet, the kind that settles when nothing else can be said. The final phase arrived as release. By morning, Seattle looked unchanged. ferries cutting gray water, traffic easing onto the bridges, cafes reopening with familiar routines. The operation left no barricades, no lingering presence. What remained were records, and records, once finalized, don't require patrols. Inside federal systems, the case closed itself methodically. Custody chains locked, inventories reconciled, chemical seizures logged and transferred to long-term storage, financial holds converted to forfeiture actions, the story resolved into ledgers and timelines that no longer argued with each other. What had moved quietly through the city for years now existed only as documentation. What made the end decisive wasn't the arrests alone, it was finality. Leadership removed meant decisions no longer arrived. Corridors disconnected meant routes no longer healed. Money stilled meant leverage evaporated. The network didn't collapse theatrically, it expired, one permission at a time, without a moment dramatic enough to remember. ICE units rotated out last, leaving coordination notes instead of presence. FBI teams archived dashboards that no longer pulsed, port schedules normalized. Warehouses reopened under new management, contractors rebid, the city's economy adjusted the way it always does, by absorbing loss and redistributing opportunity. Public language stayed measured, ongoing reviews, standard procedures, interagency cooperation, no victory laps, no promises. The words were chosen to end speculation, not fuel it. The work had already moved beyond narrative. Seattle didn't witness a spectacle. It witnessed resolution, the quiet moment when a hidden system stops negotiating with time and starts obeying it. The fentanyl didn't move, the weapons stayed cataloged, the leaders stayed detained. And the city, having felt the pressure pass, returned to its rhythms, steady, unremarkable, and deliberately unaware of how close disruption had come. That's how it ends when flow is captured, instead of chased. Not with noise, with normal returning and staying.